Good evening, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of the Watchdog, exclusively on the Synagogue News, of course. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times, and my friends, we are going to have a single topic episode today. Multiple articles, but all on the subject of pro-abortion violence. So this is going to be a pretty interesting thing. We've got multiple instances of this violence taking place since the Supreme Court draft leak. And of course, people very often like to accuse those of us on the conservative side of being violent, of being hateful, of being intolerant. And even though we are the ones who are defending against actual slaughter of infants and not them, it is in fact they who are acting in a violent manner in defense of their disgusting beliefs. Not pulling any punches today. I'm to be honest with you in a foul mood as it pertains to this issue and have been for quite some time. But regardless, we are at least going to be we are at least going to be accurate. We are at least going to be professional. We're just not going to pull any punches. So with that, I want to say a quick shalom to those of you who are here. Trusty 8 Podcast and Kevin's Biblical Discussions are both here in the live chat. So shalom and thank you for being here. Let's see. Announcements. We do have one announcement today. I'll be discussing abortion with Michael the Canadian Atheist on this channel tomorrow. That's going to be at, I believe, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, if I have everything here in front of me correct. 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And it's going to be, again, me and Michael the Canadian Atheist discussing this issue. It's going to be here on this channel since it's primarily a political issue. Obviously, the other channel is an apologetics channel. I do promise to keep my cool, but obviously, as you guys know, this is not an issue where I am anything close to the center. I don't even think the center exists. So, in that sense, it'll be particularly different than other conversations I've had with Michael. Not in the sense that it is any more aggressive or anything like that, but simply in the sense that it's there's no seeing the other side on this issue, right? It's a very, in my opinion, black and white. You either believe one way or you believe the other way, and there is no in between kind of issue. But nonetheless, if you guys are interested in that conversation, it's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be at about 1 p.m. Mountain Time on this channel. Not an episode of the Watchdog, just simply a conversation betwixt the two of us. And I hope you guys do end up finding it edifying. That's all we really got for announcements. So I'll go ahead and remind you guys, please do like and share this video. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell to get notified every time we go live. That we are trying to go live every Tuesday and Thursday with live episodes of the Watchdog. The reason that tomorrow's is on a Wednesday is because it is not, in fact, a Watchdog episode, but is instead just some political content that I felt would be better served over here. But nonetheless, hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. Be expectant, on those days. Also, if you want to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Minds, Instagram, not Instagram, sorry, I deleted my Instagram. Minds, Gab, Parler, Twitter, Facebook, any of those at the Synagogue, you can find me. Definitely consider sharing these videos to your different social media platforms, giving a tag if you'd like, and also following me on those platforms if you do indeed enjoy this content. Display names are different on all of them, but I can be found at the Synagogue on any of those different pages. I think that's just about everything I would have from there. Let me try and think. Oh, yes. If you guys do like this content, remember that you can actually help me turn this content into a career by either becoming a subscriber to the Patreon, in which case you would be donating monthly, however much you feel is necessary, or you can give a one-time donation via the PayPal. Please only do so if you feel like this content is worth it, and links will be in the live chat here in just a moment. But with all that, friends, let's go ahead and jump to pre-article discussions and all that other fun kind of stuff. And again, definitely appreciate all of you for being here. So my pre-article discussion, um, it's related to the abortion issue. So like I said, this is really just going to be a single issue conversation today. We're not really going anywhere else. But basically, what I wanted to talk about before we got into these articles is do you actually believe what it is that you're saying? I want to ask that question to either side in this situation. Do you actually believe what it is that you're saying? Pro lifers, I would like to ask, do you genuinely believe that 900,000 human beings are being slaughtered yearly, annually in this country, sometimes more and occasionally a little bit less? Do you believe that? Right? Because if you do believe that, then something like reducing it by a couple percent or something like that is not going to suffice. Okay? That is a tragedy. That is um, a like a little what would you call that article on Wikipedia kind of event, right? Where you read about this and talk about, oh my goodness, did you hear about the Great American Holocaust? That is more babies slaughtered in the womb than Native Americans slaughtered in the conquest of this country, than Jews slaughtered in the Holocaust, than Christian Protestants slaughtered during the Counter Reformation. Do you actually believe that that is the case? Do you actually believe that that number of human beings has been slaughtered in this country since 1973? If you do, act like it. Don't sit here and try to find middle ground. Don't sit here and try to pretend like you are on an equal playing field with the people who are arguing against you, because you're not. You're the one who is defending, excuse me, innocent life, and they are the ones who are saying it is okay to take innocent life. And if you don't actually believe that, then quit calling yourself pro-life. On the flip side, pro-choicers, I want to know, do you actually believe that it is not an innocent human life in that womb? Do you genuinely believe that it's not human, that it's some other species? Do you genuinely believe that it's not alive, even though it literally, biologically speaking, is? Do you genuinely believe that it is guilty of some kind of a crime? And if you do, well, then I guess I have a lot of questions for you personally. I have a lot of questions about why it is that certain humans are not, quote, human. In other words, why is it that people who have the DNA of human are not considered human persons to you? And how come that doesn't apply to whoever I feel like? If you don't actually believe that this, or if you do, excuse me, actually believe that this um, child is guilty of some kind of crime, well, I'd like to hear you explain that to me in such a way that doesn't allow me to take your life. And if you actually believe that it's not alive, well, I really hope that you don't have any vegan sort of sensibilities or anything like that, or actually any feeling whatsoever about trees, about cows, about anything else that happens to be living and not a fully functional adult human. Oh, by the way, that would include toddlers. So I want to ask people if they genuinely believe what it is that they claim to believe. And that's the end of that pre-article discussion, if you will. It's not really a discussion, it's just a question. Speaking of questions, anybody who wants to have their questions answered by me, put them in the live chat, tag me at the synagogue, and I will definitely get to answering those at the end of the program. But with that, let me go ahead and share my screen here, and then we will get started. Sorry about that, friends. So, pro abortion violence has been on the rise recently. I know a lot of people don't like to admit that sort of thing. They don't like to talk about the fact that pro aborts actually seemingly follow their little obsession with death down to the point of wanting to have you die, right? Wanting to commit acts of violence against you. And we're actually going to go ahead and see that today. There has been people showing up at justices' houses. There has been people committing acts of arson. There has been people threatening people with weapons and indeed trying to kill them with weapons. And we're going to go ahead and read about some of that today. This is exactly what these people are. This is exactly what these people do. Okay. And this is what they support as a whole, which, by the way, this is one of the big things that I think is important for us to talk about. I've been talking for some time about how I think we need a national divorce in this country, about how I think it would be good for the country to split and for us to become two separate nations. A lot of people think that that's completely absurd, but do you want to share a country with a government that fundamentally believes on the right of a person to kill another person? I don't. I would like to be in a different country, and I'm not ashamed of saying that, frankly. I know there are plenty of people I would consider my countrymen in New York, in California, in etc. places. However, I don't want to be in the same country as those places. Okay, I think that we are fundamentally different peoples, and those people who do live in those places and agree with American values, they can come over to where we live now and we can have ourselves a nice little split. I think that would be the best way for everything to work out. But I digress. Let's go ahead and get to our first example of pro abortion violence. Protesters rally at home of Justice Samuel Alito, who drafted opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, in case you guys um, don't believe in my personal consistency, you can go check previous episodes of the Watchdog, where I've been very clear to say, for example, when people were protesting at police's homes, people were protesting at Fauci's home, at governors' homes, and things like that because of the pandemic and all that. And I have been very clear to say you don't do that. You don't show up at somebody's house and start protesting there outside of their house, because when you have a mob outside of your house, that is definitely a implicit threat of violence. That's the whole reason you do that, is to intimidate people, right? And frankly, somebody does have a right to be concerned enough that they walk out outside with a gun, which is precisely why I support the McCloskeys. But here we have it happening to not Chief Justice, but Justice Samuel Alito. Protesters rally at home of Justice Samuel Alito, who drafted opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. So let's go ahead and continue. About 150 protesters marched to a Washington D.C. area, or to the Washington D.C. area, excuse me, home of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito Monday evening, after a leaked draft opinion showed Alito and the court's conservative majority, are poised to strike down Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion nationwide. Monday's protest followed weekend demonstrations outside the homes of Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Chief Justice John Roberts. In Texas, Republican lawmakers say they're preparing, to focus on preventing women from leaving the state to seek abortions elsewhere if the Supreme Court strikes down Roe v. Wade. Republican State Representative Briscoe Cain said, quote, "We'll continue to do our best to make abortion not just outlawed, but unthinkable," which I must say quite plainly, I do definitely agree with. If somebody leaves the state of Idaho to go have sex with a child who is younger than the age of consent here in the state of California, I think the state of Idaho should do what it can to prosecute that person. And I don't think this situation is any different. Just because you left my state to commit a heinous crime does not mean I will not try to charge you if I am legally able to do so once you get back into my state. So I certainly have no problem with this, provided that it is going to be constitutionally legitimate. On Capitol Hill, Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren is calling on her colleagues to pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which aims to codify Roe v. Wade. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has scheduled a roll call vote on the bill for Wednesday, but the measure appears doomed since it lacks the 60 votes to overcome a Republican-led filibuster. You remember when they were talking about, hey, let's get rid of the filibuster, let's stack the court, let's add Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. Well, this kind of thing is why. They know that even though they do have 50 seats in the Senate, which is a solid half, it's not actually a majority, plus two left-leaning independents, Bernie Sanders being an outright socialist, and the other one I believe is Angus King from Maine. He's a little bit more center. That's why I use the word left-leaning, but nonetheless, it gives them 52 votes total. But you need 60 to get past the filibuster. And so they just want to cheat and say, well, let's get rid of the filibuster entirely. And of course, that's the same reason that they wanted to stack the Supreme Court. If you have 5 justices voting one way and 4 justices voting another way, well, how about you just fill the court up with more justices? And hey, what do you know? I happen to be the president, so I can pick those justices. We have 11 now, and I added 2 more people who vote the way I want them to vote. Oh, hey, what do you know? It's a 5-6 vote now. Interesting how that works. It's cheating, is what it is. But of course, what's new? Leftists are cheating. Let's see. Going down here a little further. I guess this one is actually particularly over, but that's fine. Next article we have here. So we see that they're gathering outside of the offices of Justices Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Alito. But it gets worse than that. Pro-choice group claims arson attack on Wisconsin anti-abortion office. Oh, so now we're getting to actual acts of violence. Pro-choice group claims arson attack on Wisconsin anti-abortion office. Madison police investigate attack on Wisconsin Family Action after claim by a group calling itself, Jane's Revenge. They wrote here, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either, which definitely seems to be a threat. Again, the group calls itself Jane's Revenge, and it lit fire to a Wisconsin Family Action anti-abortion, or not anti-abortion, it is an anti-abortion group, but lit fire to their headquarter office and also left this threatening graffiti here nearby. If abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. Which, by the way, I would like to take this moment to say, my friends, buy pistols, buy assault rifles, buy shotguns. Never go out looking for violence, but never let somebody get away with it if they try to encroach upon you. I don't. Again, let me restate that. Never go looking for violence, but never allow somebody to get away with it if they decide to be violent with you. Definitely go purchase yourself some firearms and get ready, because this is only going to get worse. And frankly, you're going to have to start making decisions. Is this the kind of issue that you're actually cool fighting over, right? Because we always say we can agree to disagree and all this other kind of stuff, but this issue is going to get violent. So you guys need to ask yourselves the question, is this the kind of issue that warrants fighting? Now, again, if you can avoid the fighting, you avoid the fighting. In fact, for those of you who are Christians, the Bible says quite plainly to be at peace with all men if possible. But if they decide that it is an issue worth fighting over, are you going to let them get away with it? Or are you going to want to fight? We're at that point in history. You need to make that decision. Federal agents and detectives from the Madison Police Department are investigating a claim by a pro-choice group that it was behind a weekend arson attack on an anti-abortion office in Wisconsin. The headquarters of Wisconsin Family Action in Madison was attacked in the early hours of Sunday with a Molotov cocktail thrown through a window, starting a small fire and graffiti spray painting on an exterior wall. Nobody was hurt. In a statement reported on Tuesday by the Lincoln Journal-Star, which said it was unable to verify the group's authenticity, Jane's Revenge said it launched the attack because of the organization's anti-abortion stance and demanded that similar institutions across the U.S. disband or face increasingly extreme tactics. Big shocker coming from the side that also supports BLM and by any means necessary and Antifa, right? Quote, Wisconsin is the first flashpoint, but we are all over the U.S. and we will issue no further warnings, end quote, the statement said, citing the violence of anti-choice groups who, quote, bomb abortion clinics and assassinate doctors with impunity, end quote, as justification, even though that kind of thing has not happened for a very, very long time. In fact, I think the last attack at an abortion center was in 2015, and it wasn't even said to be an attack because of abortion. It just so happened that the person chose an abortion center for their attack, but it was actually an instance of what do you call that, mass shooting, right? Kind of like when somebody goes and shoots up a school. As far as actual anti-abortion violence, the Army of God was operating in the 1980s, and they killed a grand total of like 4 people in the entire decade. I just want to point that out because when people say things like, "Oh, there was this huge wave of anti-abortion violence," that's just simply not true. There was anti-abortion violence, certainly. I'm not going to deny that, but the idea that it was a huge wave, it was a very small amount of tax spread over a decade. In fact, spread over a period that's probably longer than a decade. It also took place over 30 years ago. The Madison attack came days after the leaking of a Supreme Court draft ruling that would overturn its 1973 Roe v. Wade decision and end almost half a century of constitutional abortion protections. Stop, Guardian, you have no idea what you're talking about. There is no provision in the Constitution that says you can actually have an abortion, and the Supreme Court did nothing to create a constitutional provision to protect abortion. That's simply a lie. I will take on any legal scholar who thinks otherwise, and believe me, you will not win. That is just simply a lie. In fact, no legal scholar argues that, which is part of the reason why I would be so confident going against one who did argue that. On Tuesday, a spokesperson for the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, told The Guardian that its agents were aware of the group's claims of responsibility, but cited the ongoing investigation for being unable to give more details. The Madison Police Department said it was aware of groups claiming responsibility for the arson at Wisconsin Family Action and are working with our federal partners to determine the veracity of the claim, end quote. There's someone with relevant information to make contact saying, quote, we take all information and tips related to this case seriously and are working to vet each and every one, end quote. At a press conference on Monday afternoon, the Madison PD and ATF agents announced a joint investigation into what it called an abortion extremism case involving an arson and graffiti attack at a pro-life advocacy office in Madison. The Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes said no suspects have so far been identified. Authorities were expected to give a further update on Tuesday afternoon. In a values statement on its website, Wisconsin Family Action describes itself as a Judeo-Christian group dedicated to, quote, strengthening, preserving, and promoting marriage, family life, and liberty. We support the sanctity of human life from the moment of conception through natural death. This includes opposing legislation that promotes the destruction of human life, which starts at conception through abortion and other means, end quote, it says. John Hugendijk, the WFA board chairman, attacked the response to the attack in a attacked the response to the attack in a tweet posted on Tuesday morning, singling out Wisconsin's Democratic Governor Tony Evers and Madison PD detectives. Quote, we need to see a much stronger message of condemnation of this activity from our governor and from local law enforcement, end quote, he wrote. And by the way, I'd just like to point out, I'm sure for many of you, this is the first you're even hearing about it. I could be wrong about that. Maybe go ahead and let me know in the live chat if I'm right or wrong about that. But I have a sneaking suspicion that whether it be CNN or Fox News, whether it be Ben Shapiro or Joe Rogan, whoever it is that you're listening to probably didn't say anything about this. Now, that's not a means of me just trying to promote myself, although definitely think you should subscribe because you're getting information here you're not getting anywhere else. However, the point is, nobody takes this kind of thing seriously. We have 3 different judges having protests outside their house. This is now an arson event. There are multiple other articles we're going to read about different acts of violence since 1970, or not since 1973, since the draft decision that was going to repeal the 1973 ruling has come out. That was a week ago. Maybe 10 days ago, possibly. But I'm fairly certain the last time that we were talking about it was the day it came out, and that was Tuesday, May the 3rd, exactly 1 week ago. I could be wrong about that, but I'm fairly certain. if I am wrong about that, I'm wrong by a matter of like 1 day. It might be 8 days. So in 8 days, this is 3 rallies outside of people's homes, which is of course a threatening act. And now we have here the arson that took place, and we're going to get to some others in this short 8-day period of time. An attack on an anti-abortion office is a relative rarity compared with attacks on abortion clinics and providers. I'd like to see some evidence, but notice here the article, The Guardian, is actually trying to, whereas we're sitting here talking about how nobody's actually actively going out of their way to talk about this, the one groups, or not the one group, but the small groups that seem to be doing so, like Democracy Now! And The Guardian, who we're reading from, are actually trying to downplay the violence and say this is a good thing. See, so the media is actually actively endorsing these groups, or at least trying to belittle their acts of violence. In 2019, The Guardian reported on an alarming escalation in picketing, vandalism, and trespassing by anti-abortion activists at medical facilities. Picketing and trespassing is what they are comparing to acts of arson and showing up at people's houses, and vandalism as well, to be fair. But that's stuff like what we saw earlier with the graffiti and things of that nature. Arsons, bombings, murders, and acid attacks were among the more than 300 acts of extreme violence recorded by the Rand Corporation between 1973 and 2003. In one of the most heinous incidents in 2009, Dr. George Tiller, a Kansas-born abortion provider, was shot dead in a church in Wichita. I just like to point out here, sorry, I have the dog. Just like to point out here that over the course of 40 years is what they're actually looking at. We're looking at 8 days today, so just remember that. And we have a single death of Dr. George Tiller here that they're able to actually record. In March, MS Magazine, and just keep those details in mind, right? Because there is anti-abortion violence that exists. I'm not denying that, but you're going to have to compare that now, that 40 years, 46 years even, if you take it all the way to 2009, compare that to what we've seen in the last 8 days. And that's not even to justify anything. It's just simply to point out the difference in sides here. In March, MS Magazine reported that the number of brick-and-mortar abortion clinics nationwide had dropped precipitously, thank you God, partly because of the constant threat of violence against personnel. Not true at all. That has, again, 1973 to 2003, total of 300 acts total in a 30-year period. They were able to record 1 death, and it wasn't even in that particular instance. And to be fair, I think there's been 4 anti-abortion related deaths in the history of anti-abortion related terrorism. So I'll even steel man this position a little bit by letting you guys know it is a little tiny bit worse than what they say. But nonetheless, let's continue. 6 states, MS said, had only 1 abortion provider, mostly small independent operators who were considered most at risk. Idaho is one of those 6 states. Again, thank God. Quote, abortion clinics have been closing at an alarming rate, the article said. Independent providers are the most vulnerable to anti-abortion attacks and violence directed at their staff, end quote. Notice, friends, this article about arson at a pro-choice center ends with, oh, well, did you know back in the 70s and 80s, there was a whole bunch of abortion violence? And notice they give us these incredibly small numbers too. It's just funny. It's like if I were to have an instance where, take the Johnny Depp case. If Johnny Depp, when he provided the audio of Amber Heard going crazy, if the answer to that was, or if the media response to that was, oh, but remember this one time when Johnny was angry at something or something like that. I don't know much about Johnny Depp, so I don't have any specifics here. But you see what I'm saying? It's like it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to sit here and say, hey, we got to report on this news, but let us just remind you that 13 years ago, one guy died. We'll continue. This is not the worst act of violence that has taken place. I'm actually going to read these in an escalating fashion. Abortion clinics have been closing at an alarming rate. Independent providers are most vulnerable to anti-abortion attacks and violence directed at their staff, they say. And of course, the Guardian would like to take your money to support the killing of babies. So The rollback of reproductive rights in America. Nobody is taking reproductive rights. It's just simply not a thing. Moving on to our next article. Let's see, which one here is the one I want to get to. This is another one on the state's involvement in letting some of this stuff happen. So that was kind of interesting. Department of Justice, silent as abortion protesters target SCOTUS justice. This one actually is from Fox News, so I'll have to eat a little tiny bit of crow because I said Fox probably wouldn't be talking about it. I guess they are talking about it a little bit, and I even already knew that, so that's my bad. But at any rate, good morning and welcome to Fox News Morning Newsletter. They didn't want to tell you to subscribe and all that other kind of stuff, but nonetheless, no justice for justices. The Department of Justice does nothing, as pro-abortion protesters target Supreme Court conservatives over leaked draft, despite federal law. DOJ does nothing. They have no response. Anyways, that's all we wanted to look at there real quick. So isn't it just interesting that here we have people talking about, oh, well, let me belittle this instance of pro-abortion violence while reminding you of anti-abortion violence that took place decades ago. But then we go to the Department of Justice and they're literally not saying anything about it at all. Moving on. Kaiser police investigate break-in attempt, fire at Oregon Right to Life building. There's another fire and break-in attempt. Someone threw 2 lit Molotov cocktails at the building and no one was hurt. The Kaiser police are investigating a Sunday evening break-in and fire at the headquarters of the advocacy group Oregon Right to Life. And of course, thank God no one was hurt. Just one instance, my 1 second, my dog is being a little bit loud. All right. Scrolling down here. Oregon Right to Life is the most prominent group in Oregon that opposes abortions. According to the police, someone attempted to break a window at the building but failed. They then threw 2 lit Molotov cocktails at the exterior. Caused a small fire, but it did little to damage and no one was in the building at the time. And of course, thank God for that. The incident triggered the building's alarm, alerting first responders. After the incident, Lewis Anderson, Oregon Right to Life Executive Director, issued a statement. Understandably, our team is shaken up by this attack. We are committed to taking proper precautions to protect the safety of our staff as we move forward, end quote, she said. Anderson said the Oregon Right to Life group doesn't condone violence and will not associate with any anti-abortion activists who do. Notice that they have to, when they were attacked, they have to specify, we are not for violence. Imagine if somebody came and beat you up and you had to say, hey guys, I know somebody just beat me up, but I promise I'm not for violence. Because everybody's going to start to justify the attacks against you. But we continue. On Sunday, vandals in Madison, Wisconsin, we just read about that, started a fire at the office of a nonprofit that opposes abortion in that state, according to law enforcement officials there. And that ends that article here. So we have people showing up outside of justices' houses, the government doing nothing about it, and local state governments and city governments doing nothing about it, when we have fires occurring in Oregon and in Wisconsin, getting worse even still. So here's another one, pro-choice protester detained. This is, by the way, if we count, so showing up at Kavanaugh's house, showing up at Roberts' house, showing up at Alito's house, fire in Madison, fire in I think it was Eugene that we were just in Oregon. That's 5 separate incidents. Here's now incident number 6. It's been 8 days since this leaked. Here's incident number 6. Pro-choice protester detained after swinging bike lock at an anti-abortion speaker. The altercation stemmed from opposing rallies happening at the same time across the street from each other outside the state house. Going down, protests, it does this jump around sometimes. Protests today in support of and against Roe v. Wade turned violent at one point Sunday afternoon when a pro-choice demonstrator swung a bike lock at an anti-abortion speaker, almost hitting him in the head. Quote, someone came up with a bike lock and they tried to hit me in the head, end quote. Said Dave, I don't know how to pronounce this name, I'm sorry, but I think it is, man, I shouldn't even try. Guiggio, maybe Guiggio, an anti-abortion advocate who was, so someone came up with a bike lock and tried to hit this Dave Guiggio fellow, which is this gentleman right here. We're going to watch the video, actually. Let me go ahead and pause that. Oh, by the way, notice he's a black guy. I just want to point that out because apparently it's whiteness and racism that causes people to be pro-life. But anyways, so someone tried to hit him in the head. This Dave Guiggio fellow, an anti-abortion advocate who was speaking at a demonstration across from a pro-choice protest where he was almost hit. Quote, I was a little surprised, but in a way not fully because I'm expecting this right now. I dodged it, but it came in my head and I was grabbed. My arm was grabbed. I was pushed and he tried to specifically hit me in the head, end quote, said Guiggio. The chance of violence has not deterred Guiggio, though. Quote, we have a right to be in the public square and share our faith, and that is what I believe. The protester who initially hit Guiggio's sound system before advancing on Guiggio himself was searched and detained by police and later identified as 25-year-old resident in Alston. They're due to appear in court in Boston at an unspecified date. The altercation stemmed from opposing rallies happening at the same time across the street from each other outside the State House, with hundreds of pro-choice protesters on one side and smaller numbers of anti-abortion demonstrators on the other. The altercation stemmed, hang on, I just read that. Quote, everybody has got to do something, end quote, said a pro-choice protester at the rally. Quote, you can't just sit at home and hope it all works out because it's not going to work out, end quote. Other protesters remarked on the tension clearly present between the two sides on the street. Quote, there was a lot of emotion. It's kind of like a scary thing if you think about it, end quote. The demonstrations from both sides lasted approximately 2 hours, continuing peacefully after the violent altercation between the members of the two camps. No. There was not violent altercations between the members of the two camps. This is, again, the propaganda coming in. There was one camp attacking the other camp. That's what actually happened. So let's just be clear about things. Both groups are planning on organizing rallies for weeks to come. Now, real quick, let's go ahead and watch a little bit about this. Let me go ahead and refresh it so the actual video comes up. And that is an ad. My apologies. Just one moment. All right. So go ahead and turn that up. And you guys can tell me whether or not you hear it. I think you should.
All weekend, demonstrators have taken to the streets of Boston, rallying for abortion rights. Today's rally on the Common turned violent. Someone lashed out at a fellow demonstrator. NBC 10's Eli Rosenberg is live in Boston, where police did make an arrest. Eli.
Well, Katie, tonight police tell us they have arrested a 25-year-old. We were out here and saw this person swing a bike lock at another person multiple times. And tonight, this victim is explaining exactly what happened. Things turning heated and violent outside the State House. A person with a bike lock sprinting across the street, taking a swing at a man with a speaker.
You had somebody come with a bike lock and they tried to hit me in the head.
Watch out. That same person running back seconds later, swinging at David Gigio again. The crowd moves in to break it up.
I dodged it, but it came at my head, and I was grabbed. My arm was grabbed. I was pushed, and he was trying to specifically hit me in the head.
It was just after two rallies gathered outside the State House on Sunday afternoon. On one side of Beacon Street, hundreds of pro-choice supporters.
Everybody's got to do something, right? You can't just sit at home and hope it all works out, because it's not going to.
People have.
On the other side, a smaller pro-life rally.
It's a debate. It's been heated all day. You know, it's pretty crazy.
After multiple swings, a plainclothes Boston police officer rushes in, and the person was led away as the two rallies continued.
There's a lot of motion. I mean, it's kind of like a scary thing if you think about it.
After a brief search, the person was then walked across Beacon and put in the back of a Boston police SUV. As both rallies went on peacefully the rest of the evening.
We have a right to be in the public square and share our faith, and that's what I believe.
And tonight, Boston police tell us the suspect will appear in court here in Boston at a later date. Meanwhile, today, both sides said More rallies are planned in the coming weeks. Live in Boston, Eli Rosenberg, NBC 10 Boston.
All right, let me go ahead and I gotta wait for this to get back up so I can pause it.
Don't miss Boston Ballet's.
All right, so a little bit of a video there for you guys. So what is that? That's 6 different incidents in an 8-day period, but it still isn't over. The articles we actually have are over, but the actual violence itself isn't over. There was an attack at a Catholic church in Boulder, Colorado. Once again, it was acts of vandalism, and thankfully nobody has been hurt yet. This was a group that called themselves Ruth Sent Us that attacked this Catholic church in Colorado, and they attacked it because of its very vocal pro-life stances. Let's see, there were some other ones here I definitely wanted to reference as well. May 2nd saw the the doxing of pro-abortion, or excuse me, of pro-life activists from a couple of abortion radicals in Portland, Oregon. This was on May the 2nd, like directly after this had actually been released. So I think it was 8 days that it was released, but regardless, people actually doxing these pro-life advocates so that people would know their places of business, so that people would know where they lived, all this other kind of stuff. There was an attack at the Loretta House Pregnancy Center in Denton, Texas. Let's see, we've had, of course, just normal things like, the harassment of folks and their, people calling and leaving violent messages and threatening messages and stuff like that. And et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. And we are only 8 days in to this leak. The actual abortion decision has not even come through the court yet. We've only seen the leak of a draft. And 8 days into the leak of this draft, we are able to list, that's 10 separate incidents? Maybe it was only 8 or 9 separate incidents. I'll have to go back and recount. We had the Portland one, the Denton one, the Boulder one, the 6 I mentioned, so it'll be 9 separate incidents. 9 separate incidents in 8 days. In 8 days. And has anyone been killed so far? Thank God, no. But how long do you think it's actually going to take until we get there? And by the way, for the record, I would like to point out that there is some who are suggesting that that is actually not true. I've been unable to verify any instances of somebody dying as a result of this violence. However, I have seen people online talking about a couple of deaths from this violence. And if it turns out that I can end up verifying that, I will definitely let you guys know. But here we are. We have more incidents of violence from these pro-choicers. More incidents of violence from these pro-choicers than we do days since the draft leak actually happened. I'm going to say that again. There has been more individual incidences of pro-choice violence since the 2nd of May than there has been days since the 2nd of May. Yeah. So, I mean, when people want to sit up here and start talking about us being somehow violent against women for telling them that they can't murder somebody else, this is what we're actually dealing with here. A group of violent, anti-life thugs who are ready and willing to go to physical war over this. And that's why I asked the question earlier. I don't want anybody to look for any violence whatsoever. The Bible says, if at all possible, be at peace with all men. But when somebody shows up at your place of business or to your protest, getting violent, what is your response going to be? Because we are at that time in history, friends. That's where we are. That is literally where we are. Do I know what to do about that? No, I don't. I do know, at the very least, that I'm not going to back down. And I'm not going to pull punches. But this is where we are. And we'll have more incidences. It's definitely going to happen. It's going to happen more. We're going to see deaths in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months. We've already seen it. BLM protests killed 30 people and had over $2 billion worth of damages, and the left was cool with that. So they already know that the media, that their politicians, that the American populace as a whole is going to be perfectly fine with them committing acts of violence. Do you really think they're not going to commit more acts of violence in this particular issue? They will. Trust me. It's going to happen again and again and again and again and again and again and again. More acts of violence on by pro-abortion activists than days since the wave started. I don't know what else to do with that information, honestly. I mean, like, what more do we want, right? Gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse every single time we are talking. Anyways, friends, I'm done. If you liked this video, please like and share this video. Consider subscribing if you had not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. Leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, or anything like that in the comment section below. I want to remind you guys to be watchdogs, and I want to ask you this question. In the face of Armageddon, are you going to compromise?